you had the Prophet ﷺ, now roughly when he was approaching the age of 6, his mother Amina wanted to take him and introduce him and, kind of connect him with the family that he did have, right? That was still alive. And this family was living in a city called Yathrib, or near Yathrib, actually near Quba in Yathrib. And so the Prophet ﷺ was taken with his mother Amina, and they went and they journeyed to Yathrib, and they went with some help, right? There was, Ayman, who was kind of like his another motherly figure that he had. Her nickname was Baraka, and she also accompanied Amina. She was like Amina's help, and she also took care of the Prophet ﷺ along the way. So they went and they visited the family of Amina, right? So basically his maternal uncles and aunts. At that stage, of course, you can imagine like he's very excited. This is a child who hasn't, seen this type of family interaction. He's been living in the desert. He's very happy, So the Prophet ﷺ, for the first time as a child, as a 6-year-old, is experiencing this happiness. And just as we see this happiness and this relief and this moment, right, that's being kind of codified in his mind, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, another tragedy, unfortunately, is brewing, and that is that his mother Amina becomes very sick. And this is something that happens suddenly, right? She's journeying back from visiting her family from Yathrib, from the area near Quba, and she falls very sick, and it's just a few days. And as they're journeying, there's a small city, a small town, really, it's not even a city, on the path towards Mecca from that place called Abwa. And that is where Amina, she falls terminally ill, and she actually passes away with the young Prophet ﷺ at her side, 6 years old. And it's very, very difficult to imagine that somebody who has gone through so many stages of loss has yet another tragedy to deal with. And the same questions that we ask, right? The same thoughts that go through our mind. Like, why? Like, why is this happening to a child? Why is this tragedy occurring to somebody who doesn't deserve it? There's nothing that he did or could do. Even in Islam, we believe that before puberty, there is no accountability for anything. So there's no mistake that he could have done even that would have deserved or would have, made this something that made sense. So this is just tragedy now layered upon tragedy. And subhanAllah, the narrations that talk about this is very emotional, but the narrations talk about how the Prophet ﷺ as a 6-year-old kid didn't know, what was going on, what his future was. And it was only because of the presence of that woman, Baraka, Ayman, right? His mother's helper that was taking care of him, who eventually became another one of his foster mothers. It was only because of her presence that he had any stability whatsoever. And subhanAllah, even in the midst of that tragedy, there was still a solution or something, some kind of relief, and that was going back to his family in Mecca, the people that he had, his grandfather. Remember Abdul Muttalib? Remember the one who said that the camels are mine, but the house is going to be taken care of by its Lord? That's his grandfather. And so he goes back to Mecca and immediately is brought into the care of his grandfather, who is this esteemed elder in Quraysh, somebody who's respected, somebody who is, the father of his father, his paternal grandfather. But then 2 years after that, Abdul Muttalib also passes away. So when we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, it literally brings to the mind this phrase that we have in English, which is when it rains, it pours. When it rains, it pours. Now, we think about this tragedy and this difficulty as an 8-year-old. My son is barely 9. I mean, if I tell my son, like, we don't have milk for cereal, it's like, we're done. And there's a point to this. And I'm not trying to make this lighthearted because it's anything but lighthearted. But there is some thought about what was the divine strategy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was placing the Prophet ﷺ in. And the scholars actually take some time and they write about this. They actually talk about this because you can't go over so many losses, so much tragedy without exploring and discussing, like, okay, what are some of the benefits? Like, what's the fa'idah? Like, what's the benefit of this? And the scholars, they write a few things that are very interesting. One of the things that they write is that they write that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, if you know about his life later on, if you fast forward and learn about things later on, you basically learn that he is somebody that gets, at every level, he goes through some difficulty, some betrayal, some heartbreak, some challenge. And It happens not only when he's a child, but when he's an adult, when he's responsible, when he has a lot of people that he's looking after, when the decisions that he makes are actually consequential, he gets hurt, he gets burned. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so the scholars write that this type of tragedy, this type of difficulty, must have been, in some way, shape, or form, at least in part, a way to form a layer of resilience. And even to the degree that some scholars of Sirah say, this was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a very, very difficult manner, but in the only manner that it could be accomplished, removing any form of reliance upon anyone else besides Allah. Like at some point, everybody in this room has to come to that realization for themselves. And that is what? That as much as people love you in your life, there is a ceiling for the amount that you can trust and rely on them. Even your own mother and father, even your own, your relatives, your siblings, your best friends, even your spouse, even your own children. At some level, everybody has their limit. If it's not emotional, like if somebody's just like, look, I'm not capable of like sacrificing that for you, then it could be circumstantial. Maybe that person lives somewhere else. Or it could honestly just be physical. The person's just not physically capable of doing what you're asking for them to do. So there's going to be a cap on every single person, their ability to take care of what you need. There's only one being that there is no ceiling, there is no cap, and that is Allah. And when you go through a tragedy and you go through loss, the scholars write that part of the learning that's happening in that loss is a gentle, almost like inaudible, but very subtle reminder that it is time to reevaluate who you rely on the most. It is time to think about that. And so the Prophet ﷺ, as a young child, because his role was so great, we talked about how certain miracles only happened for him. Certain tests also only happened for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So because his role was going to be so great, the last messenger of all time, for all of humanity, that's an incredible position to have to take. Those are, as we say, big shoes to fill. This type of tarbiyah, this type of growth mentorship was something that he went through, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that made him into the person who he was.